The girl was known throughout her village not for wealth or fine possessions, but for the quiet radiance that followed her wherever she went. Her name was whispered with warmth by children who chased after her laughter, and even the elders, whose wisdom was tempered by age, spoke of her with fondness. She was kind in the way that was effortless, offering a hand to those burdened, listening with patience to those who were unheard, and giving away what little she had without expecting anything in return. Though her family treated her as if she were of little importance, the people of the village saw her as a rare light, a spirit that made even the air around her feel softer. Her late mother had often told her that gentleness was not weakness but strength, that kindness was a language spirits could understand more deeply than words. Those words had shaped her, for her mother was no ordinary woman but one said to have been touched by the spirits of water and sky. Before her death, she had left her daughter a single gift, a dress woven with her own hands, yet shimmering with a life that could not belong to mere fabric. It looked plain at first glance, resting quietly in its wooden chest, but when she draped it across her shoulders, it seemed to breathe. The threads glimmered faintly like morning dew in sunlight, and the air shifted around it as though the unseen had leaned closer in reverence. The girl had not worn the dress often. She kept it folded carefully, almost as if protecting a sacred flame, because her mother had told her, "This dress carries not only fabric but spirit. Treat it with love and it will protect you. Wear it with pride and it will reveal what lies hidden." These words became a quiet prayer in the girl's heart. To her, the dress was more than clothing, it was the last embrace of her mother, a memory stitched into being. Whenever her fingers touched its threads, she felt her mother's presence, warm and reassuring, as though the veil between the living and the departed had thinned. Yet, what made her truly beloved was not the possession of this magical gift, but her way of living in harmony with the unseen. The spirits of the land knew her heart. The wind, playful in the fields, often tugged at her braids as if teasing a friend. Birds would perch near her feet without fear, chirping in rhythms that seemed to echo her thoughts. Even the river, wide and strong, mirrored her gentleness. When she knelt at its banks, its waters seemed to hush, rippling softly as though listening to her whispers. The villagers noticed these small wonders, and though some dismissed them as coincidence, others nodded knowingly, believing she was truly her mother's child, carrying that bond between human and spirit. Despite her light, she lived a life of trials. Her father had remarried after her mother's death, and the new household, filled with the sharp voices of her stepmother and stepsister, offered her little comfort. They looked upon her kindness as weakness, mocking her for the simplicity of her clothes and the calluses on her hands. Her stepsister, especially, envied the love she received from the villagers and the soft glow that seemed to linger about her. But the girl never complained, never allowed bitterness to stain her spirit. She worked from dawn until dusk, carrying water, gathering firewood, cooking meals, and tending to tasks without protest. If her hands ached, she would smile through it. If her heart felt heavy, she would sing softly to herself, songs her mother had once hummed by the hearth. The dress remained her secret. Her stepmother and stepsister knew nothing of its power, for she had guarded it with the same devotion one gives to a hidden flame in the cold. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the world outside lay hushed, she would lift the chest's lid and let the moonlight spill over its shimmering surface. In those moments, she would imagine her mother's voice telling her that she was not alone, that she carried within her not just a legacy but a destiny. Her life was humble, but her spirit was vast, reaching beyond the walls of her home into the very fabric of the unseen. And though shadows of jealousy loomed in her household, the spirits who had long known her mother now watched her with equal tenderness. They knew her journey had only begun, and that the dress resting silently in its chest would one day awaken to reveal its true purpose. The stepsister's envy began as a small spark, but like fire fed with dry grass, it soon grew into something consuming. Each day she would watch her sibling move through the village, her presence calm and warm, her laughter carrying like a song the spirits themselves cherished. She was not only loved by the people but also by unseen forces, and this love seemed to gather around her like light around the sun. The dress she wore, carefully folded and only brought out on rare occasions, had been left behind by her late mother. It shimmered with an otherworldly glow, threads that looked like moonlight woven with colors the earth itself seemed to create. The villagers whispered that it was no ordinary garment, but a gift carrying the blessings of the spirits. The stepsister could not look upon it without her heart twisting in bitterness. At first she told herself she only admired it. She traced the thought over and over in her mind, that such beauty was wasted on her kind-hearted sibling, who was already blessed with a gentle spirit and grace that needed no embellishment. What use was it for someone already adored to have something so rare, so powerful, when she herself was left in shadows? This reasoning became her excuse, the root from which her jealousy sprouted. She began to see the dress as more than fabric. She saw it as a key, one that could unlock love, admiration, and respect, the things she desperately craved but never earned. She would watch her stepsister open the carved wooden chest and lift the dress with reverent hands. Her sibling never flaunted it, never wore it to boast, but always with quiet gratitude, as though it was not hers to own but hers to safeguard. This humility only deepened the stepsister's resentment. The thought gnawed at her: if she herself possessed such a dress, she would not waste it. She would make the village bow to her, men seek her hand, and women envy her presence. Every time the chest creaked open, every time the magical fabric caught the light, the stepsister's heart sank further into a pit of greed. Nights became restless for her. She lay awake thinking of the ways her life could change if only the dress belonged to her. She imagined herself walking into gatherings wrapped in its light, every gaze drawn to her, whispers rising about her beauty, her strength, her worth. No one would dare call her second or lesser or cruel. She would no longer be in the shadow of a sister so naturally loved. The idea became intoxicating, a vision she could not shake. Soon, admiration of the dress was no longer admiration at all, it was hunger. She began to despise the one who had it. Every kindness her stepsister offered seemed like mockery, every smile seemed a reminder of what she lacked. The stepsister's envy grew sharp, and her eyes began to linger not with curiosity but with calculation. She whispered to herself in the stillness of her room, vowing that the dress would one day be hers. Each time she saw her sibling wear it, even for a brief ritual or a celebration, her jealousy boiled hotter, convincing her that she was being robbed of the life she deserved. Soon she could not see the magical dress as a gift of love. To her, it was proof of unfairness, proof that fate favored her sister and overlooked her. It was not enough that her sibling had beauty without effort, kindness without pride, and blessings without asking. Now she had this enchanted garment as well, and that was more than the stepsister could bear. Her envy consumed her so deeply that she stopped seeing her sister as kin and began to see her as an obstacle. The dress was no longer just an object. It became the center of her obsession, the promise of everything she thought she was owed. Little by little, her desire sharpened into a dangerous resolve. She would have the dress no matter what it took. The spirits may have loved her sister, but she believed power could be stolen, beauty could be claimed, and love could be forced if she had the right weapon. And in her mind, the dress was that weapon, waiting to fall into her hands. When the moon was high and the household lay in deep slumber, the stepsister crept across the creaking wooden floor with the stealth of a thief who had rehearsed her crime in her heart long before her hands attempted it. Her breath was shallow, her eyes gleamed with a strange light of triumph, and in her chest, her heartbeat raced like a drum leading her forward. She had dreamed of this moment for weeks, whispering promises to herself that soon the dress, the shimmering garment that glowed faintly in the dark like moonlight caught in fabric, would be hers. Her steps were careful as she made her way to the chest at the corner of her sister's room. She paused only once, glancing at the gentle face of the girl who slept peacefully, unaware that her most treasured possession was about to be stolen. A pang of doubt crossed the stepsister's mind, but it was quickly drowned by envy. She pressed her lips tightly together, crouched by the chest, and lifted the lid. There it was. The magical dress, folded with tenderness as though even in its resting place it deserved reverence. Its fabric caught the faint light seeping through the cracks of the window, shifting in shades of silver and pale blue, like the sea touched by starlight. The stepsister reached out trembling hands, and when her fingers brushed the material, a strange warmth traveled through her arms. For a brief second, she felt as though the dress resisted her grip, as if it knew she was not its rightful owner. But her hunger for beauty and power was stronger than any hesitation. With a triumphant hiss under her breath, she yanked it out and pressed it to her chest, clutching it like a stolen crown. She turned to the sleeping girl, her stepsister, who stirred only slightly in her dreams. A smile, almost cruel in its sharpness, spread across the thief's face. "You don't deserve this," she whispered in the silence, though no one could hear. "You hide it, guard it as if you could ever be worthy of it. Tomorrow they will all see me in it, and they will forget you ever existed." Her voice was low, mocking, like a serpent spitting venom in the dark. Holding the dress, she tiptoed away, her heart thundering louder with each step toward her own chamber. Once safe behind her closed door, she spread the garment across her bed and stared at it with feverish delight. She imagined herself walking into the village gathering draped in its radiance, the eyes of men and women alike fixed only on her. She pictured her sister standing in the crowd, powerless, naked in her simplicity, her face burning with shame as everyone praised the thief for her beauty. The thought filled her with such satisfaction that she laughed softly to herself, a laugh that grew louder until it echoed in the night like a warning. But when she tried to slip the dress over her shoulders, something uncanny happened. The fabric felt heavy, far heavier than it had any right to be, as though it carried the weight of the sea itself. She struggled, muttering under her breath, tugging and pulling, until finally it seemed to settle upon her body. The dress shimmered, yes, but it clung to her skin in a way that was neither gentle nor flattering. Still, she was too blinded by her ambition to care. She spun before the cracked mirror propped against the wall, imagining the gasps and cheers of the villagers. "Tomorrow," she whispered again, "they will all bow their eyes to me." She returned the dress carefully to its hiding place under her bed, not wanting her sister to notice the theft too soon. The mocking words still lingered in her mind like poison, that her sister was unworthy, that she, the thief, was destined for greatness. She drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of crowns, applause and lights. But the dress, quiet and shimmering even in the shadows, seemed to pulse faintly as though alive, waiting. By morning, the girl who had lost her dress awoke to a hollow emptiness in her heart. She searched the chest with trembling hands, her face growing pale as realization struck her. Tears pricked her eyes not only because the dress was gone, but because she understood who had taken it. Her heart broke at the betrayal, yet somewhere deep within she trusted that the spirits who had blessed her mother's gift would not let such treachery go unanswered. And as the sun rose higher, the stepsister hummed happily to herself, rehearsing her entrance into the village, never knowing that the dress she coveted carried not only beauty, but a will of its own. The night of the village gathering arrived, a time when the people would dance, feast and share stories beneath the moonlight. The stepsister strode into the clearing at the center of the village, her head held high, the stolen dress clinging tightly to her frame. The garment glittered unnaturally under the firelight, brighter than any fabric woven by human hands. Whispers spread like wind through tall grass. Many remarked on its beauty, but others tilted their heads, uneasy at how the dress seemed to shimmer with its own strange life, as though the threads themselves were breathing. The young woman whom it truly belonged to stood at the edge of the gathering, her eyes full of sadness and quiet fear, for she could see the warning signs that others ignored. The stepsister, however, relished the stares. She lifted her chin higher, parading among the crowd as though she were a queen. She laughed louder than anyone, her voice ringing false but commanding attention. "Do you see how it fits me?" she taunted, deliberately throwing a glance toward her step-sibling. "Perhaps it was always meant to be mine. Some things look better on those who truly deserve them." The villagers chuckled uneasily, some nodding along, while others frowned at the cruelty of her words. Still, she basked in the shallow admiration, spinning in circles so the firelight caught every fold of the dress. But then, something strange began to happen. At first, the movements of the dress seemed like clever tricks of the wind, the flowing fabric swaying more than it should. Yet when no breeze stirred, the silk still fluttered as though alive, and its shimmering threads pulsed like veins filled with light. The stepsister faltered mid-spin, gripping at the skirt to still it, but the garment twitched away from her grasp like a living creature defying her hold. A ripple of murmurs swept through the villagers. Children clutched at their mother's arms, elders muttered blessings under their breath, and some crossed themselves against evil spirits. The stepsister forced a laugh, though her voice cracked. "It is only the light of the fires," she insisted, raising her arms to show off the glowing sleeves. But her words betrayed a tremor. The dress pulled taut against her chest as though tightening its grip, and the shimmer brightened into a glow that seemed to come from within. With every step she took, the garment shifted slightly, refusing to obey the movement of her body. She attempted to dance, to prove control, but instead the dress forced her feet into awkward jerks, twisting her stride until the villagers no longer clapped but watched in uneasy silence. The young woman at the edge of the gathering felt her heart ache. She remembered her mother's words when she was first given the dress. "This cloth holds my love and my spirit. It will know who treats it with kindness and who seeks to harm." And now before everyone, that promise was unfolding. The stepsister's face flushed with anger, mistaking fear for pride. She raised her arms again, trying to wrestle the fabric into stillness, but the shimmering glow spread across her body like fire, illuminating every thread until she seemed wrapped in molten light. Villagers began backing away, forming a circle, whispering about curses and blessings, about spirits that could not be mocked. The dress began to hum faintly, a sound like the sea heard in a shell, low and rising. The stepsister shouted over it, desperate to reassert herself, but the fabric tightened again, clamping around her wrists and waist until she gasped for breath. Her laughter, once triumphant, broke into a shrill scream. The crowd recoiled in shock, while the rightful owner of the dress lowered her eyes, torn between pity and inevitability. She alone understood that this was not mere magic for spectacle, it was a reckoning. The gathering, which should have been filled with joy and dance, became a stage for justice as the living garment revealed that it could not be possessed by envy or deceit. All eyes turned toward the stepsister, now trembling as the dress moved of its own will, no longer her adornment but her captor. What had been a symbol of pride and power was now clearly something far greater, a reminder that spirits remembered loyalty, and that even in the heart of celebration truth cannot be silenced. The stepsister had thought her moment of triumph had finally come. She stood tall at the center of the gathering, laughing at those who dared question her new glory. But her laughter began to falter when the magical fabric stirred in ways no ordinary garment could. The silken folds quivered as though breathing, and before she could adjust it, the dress slithered across her body with deliberate force. It no longer lay against her like a gown to be admired. It became something alive, something with will. The crowd gasped as the sleeves crept upward, winding tightly around her arms, pulling them against her chest. She tried to tug them free, but the more she struggled, the stronger the fabric tightened, as if feeding on her panic. The shimmering patterns embroidered by the mother's hands seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the torches. The glow was not soft now but sharp, cold, and commanding, like a judgment from unseen eyes. It started at her shoulders and trickled downwards, the fabric snaking and knotting itself into vines that clung to her skin with unrelenting strength. Around her waist, the threads wrapped twice, thrice, pulling taut until she could barely breathe. Her proud posture collapsed into a frantic twist, her body bending under the weight of something she had thought was her trophy but was now her captor. The villagers murmured, some too afraid to move closer, others whispering that the spirits had awoken. Her voice rose in a shriek, calling for help, demanding her father, her friends, anyone to cut her free. But each time she cried out, the dress seemed to answer with another constriction. The hem coiled around her ankles, knotting them together so tightly she nearly toppled over. She staggered, hopping on bound feet, her arms pinned, her hair falling wildly into her face. What once shimmered with beauty now gleamed with menace, threads snapping outward like tendrils, then snapping back against her skin. The villagers no longer looked at her with admiration but with dread, for they saw the garment not as a prize but as a living judgment. Her stepsister, the rightful owner, watched with wide, tearful eyes. She had never wished for such cruelty, but she also knew this was the power her mother had whispered of, the spirit guard woven into the threads. The stepsister's envy and cruelty had awakened its deeper truth. The bound girl screamed and writhed, falling to her knees, yet the fabric only wound tighter, circling her wrists, crossing over her chest, making her resemble prey caught in a hunter's snare. Each breath she managed came in sharp gasps, every movement answered by the constricting embrace of the magical cloth. At last her mocking laughter was gone, replaced by desperate wails. But the dress paid no heed to her pleas. It coiled and coiled, alive with a force that seemed both ancient and unyielding, binding her as though declaring before all who watched, she was not its chosen one, and her theft would not go unpunished. The villagers gasped as the stepsister screamed, her voice echoing through the air as the magical dress pulled her with unnatural force. It dragged her feet across the earth, leaving streaks of dust and grass torn in its wake. The women shrieked, clutching their children closer, while the men stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or flee from the strange spectacle. The girl's nails clawed at the ground, carving desperate lines in the soil as she begged for anyone to cut the dress away. But every time a hand reached forward, the shimmering fabric snapped back like a whip, lashing out with sparks of light that left those nearby stumbling backward in terror. It became clear that the dress was no longer a garment, it was a spirit come alive, enforcing the justice her envy had summoned. Her cries filled the night as the force dragging her grew stronger. The once graceful folds of silk now resembled waves, surging forward as though answering the call of the distant ocean. The crowd followed at a distance, unable to resist witnessing the fate that was unfolding. Elders muttered prayers under their breath, some saying it was the spirit of the late mother returning for vengeance, others whispering that the sea itself had always longed for the enchanted cloth. The stepsister's hair tangled wildly in the wind, her voice breaking as she pleaded for mercy, swearing she would return the dress, swearing she never meant harm. But the glowing threads tightened around her wrists and ankles, dragging her step by step closer to the sound of the crashing waves. The path that led from the village to the sea had never felt so long or so haunting. Every footstep resounded like thunder, every cry seemed to pierce the hearts of those watching. The young woman, the rightful owner of the dress, stood among the villagers, tears streaming down her face. She had never wished for her stepsister's destruction, only for peace and fairness. Yet the dress, bound to her mother's spirit, seemed unmoved by compassion. Its justice was absolute, its loyalty unwavering. With every tug, the dress pulled the envious thief closer to her doom, as though the earth itself tilted toward the ocean. As they neared the cliffs, the roar of the sea grew deafening. The waves slammed against the rocks with merciless force, spraying mist into the air like the breath of a beast waiting for its prey. The villagers stopped at the edge of the path, too frightened to follow further. Only the bound girl and the glowing garment continued forward. The dress now gleamed brighter than the moon, casting light over the trembling waves, its fabric spreading like wings of water. The stepsister's screams grew weaker as exhaustion overtook her, yet the dress pulled with tireless determination, dragging her closer and closer until the sand beneath her hands turned wet and cold. The ocean, vast and endless, seemed to open its arms. The final pull came sudden and swift, dragging her across the shore where foam licked at her face. She tried to dig her heels into the sand, but the waves surged forward, embracing her in their icy grip. The villagers could only watch from afar, their silhouettes trembling against the firelight of their torches. The girl's last cry was swallowed by the sea as the dress dragged her into the depths, vanishing beneath the surface in a burst of shimmering light. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the waters grew calm as though the sea had claimed what it was owed. A heavy silence settled over the crowd. No one spoke, no one dared move. The young woman who had been robbed stood with her hands clasped to her chest, her heart torn between grief and relief. The spirits had made their choice, the sea had accepted its offering, and the dress that had been her mother's gift was gone, lost forever beneath the waves. What remained was the lesson etched into every villager's soul. Envy had a price, and the spirits never left a debt unpaid. The waves rose with a force that made the ground beneath the villagers tremble, their voices like rolling thunder as they crashed against the shore. The stepsister, still tangled in the magical dress, was dragged to the edge of the sea, her screams lost beneath the booming of the waters. Her arms flailed uselessly, but the fabric clung tighter, glowing faintly as if the spirits themselves were threading through it. The ocean air grew heavy, thick with salt and power, and those who stood watching felt their knees weaken under the weight of something older and far greater than human understanding. Out of the mist rising from the waves, shapes began to form, shadowy figures with eyes like shimmering pearls, the spirits of the sea. Their voices wove together, neither male nor female, but something vast, echoing in every ear, in every heart. They did not speak as mortals do, they roared like waves colliding against cliffs, yet the meaning was clear. Envy has a price and theft cannot be left unpunished. The stepsister screamed again, but her words carried no power. She pleaded, shouted that she only wanted beauty, that she only wanted what had made her sister admired. But the ocean spirits cared little for excuses. They declared that her envy had turned her heart into something sharp and hollow, and it had blinded her to the kindness her sister had shown. The villagers, watching in silent awe, whispered prayers, some to protect themselves, others for forgiveness, but none dared move to intervene. They knew this was not for human hands to resolve. The waves drew closer, towering walls of water circling around her like judgment made flesh. The dress tightened further, almost fusing with her skin, its glow flickering like lightning beneath the storm-darkened sky. As the sea spirits spoke, the air seemed to vibrate with their authority. They reminded all who listened that gifts from the spirit world were not meant to be stolen or misused. The late mother's blessing to her daughter had been rooted in love, and love alone could awaken the dress's magic in harmony. In greedy hands, the gift twisted into punishment, for beauty sought through envy is nothing but a curse. The stepsister wept, her tears mingling with the salt spray, but even her sorrow seemed hollow, for it was born of fear, not remorse. The waters surged higher, forming a spiral around her, the dress shimmering brighter until it looked like liquid silver entwined with her body. The villagers gasped as the sea itself began to speak more fiercely, reminding them that envy not only harms the envier but poisons the bonds of kinship and community. A ripple of shame passed through some who, in their own hearts, had secretly coveted another's blessings. It was as though the ocean had peeled back their hidden desires and exposed them in the open. Still, all eyes returned to the stepsister, who was now knee-deep in churning foam. The spirits' voices thundered once more, pronouncing her judgment. She would be carried away not to die but to serve the restless waters, to learn humility in the depths where no vanity or envy could follow. The stepsister cried out for forgiveness, but the sea drowned her words. With one final crash, the waves surged forward, enveloping her completely. For a moment, only the glowing threads of the dress could be seen, winding tighter and tighter, until they were pulled beneath the surface. The waters stilled, almost eerily calm as if satisfied. Then, in a gentler voice, the sea spirits turned their words to the villagers. They spoke of balance, that gifts given in love are to be honored, that envy destroys what it seeks to possess, and that those who witness such judgment must carry its lesson in their hearts. Silence lingered after the sea withdrew, broken only by the sound of the wind brushing through palm leaves and the villagers' uneasy breathing. Some bowed their heads, trembling at what they had witnessed. Others stared out at the ocean, half expecting the girl to rise again. But she was gone, taken by the waters, claimed by the spirits, her envy weighed and judged. The magical dress had disappeared with her, vanishing back into the realm of spirits, beyond human reach. What remained was the echo of the sea's warning, a reminder that every act of envy, every theft born from greed, ripples outward until it meets a reckoning too powerful to escape. Though the night air was thick with the salt of the sea and the cries of the villagers still echoed faintly from the shore, the young woman who had once been wronged by her stepsister did not move with anger in her heart. She followed the glowing trail that the magical dress left behind, each shimmer upon the ground like a fragment of her late mother's spirit guiding her. Her chest was heavy, not with hatred but with grief, for the bonds of blood, however twisted by envy and cruelty, could not be erased by one act of betrayal. She walked until her knees trembled, and when she reached the place where the waves had swallowed her stepsister whole, she fell upon the sand. Her hands sank into the damp earth as though she could pull her sister back from the depths with sheer will. Tears streamed down her face, and though the sea spirits roared, demanding acknowledgement of their judgment, she lifted her voice in prayer. She prayed not for the return of the stolen dress, nor for vengeance, but for her stepsister's soul, that it might be washed clean of envy and bitterness, that it might find peace in the unseen world. The sea, alive with spirits that could taste the weight of mortal hearts, stirred at her words. The waves that had risen tall and vengeful began to soften, curling into smaller shapes that lapped at her feet. The moonlight broke through the restless clouds, painting her in silver, and the villagers who had followed at a distance could see the strange, quiet power of compassion ripple across the water. Many whispered among themselves, confused by her mercy. How could she pray for one who had mocked her, stolen from her, and brought shame upon her name? But in her heart, the young woman knew her mother's teachings, that kindness shown to even the cruelest soul could carry more weight than any punishment. She clasped her hands tightly, her body trembling, and her voice rose above the tide. She begged the spirits to forgive her sister, to guide her through the darkness that she had brought upon herself. The sea did not release the stepsister, for the judgment had already been made, but in the deep waters her spirit stirred. For the first time since her envy had taken root, a glimmer of regret touched her. The magical dress, now resting again in its rightful place beside the girl who had loved it purely, seemed to pulse softly with her mother's warmth, as though acknowledging the act of forgiveness. The villagers who watched began to fall silent, a sense of reverence stealing over them. Where they had expected anger they saw mercy. Where they had expected curses they heard prayers. And though the stepsister was gone, her fate sealed beneath the waves, the young woman's compassion shifted the balance of things. The spirits of the sea, once stern and merciless, grew calmer, their voices fading into a hush like a distant lullaby. As the dawn began to stretch across the horizon, painting the world in hues of gold and rose, the girl rose from her knees. Her dress, glowing faintly with the blessing of both her mother and the spirits, wrapped around her like a shield not of pride but of love. She turned to the villagers, her tear-streaked face radiant not with triumph but with sorrow tempered by hope. She had lost a sister, but she had not lost her heart. And in her mercy she had shown them all that even in the face of betrayal, compassion could stand taller than envy, brighter than cruelty, and stronger than the harshest waves. The crowd of villagers stood frozen at the edge of the cliffs, their cries swallowed by the deafening roar of the sea. The stepsister's screams echoed against the night as the enchanted dress dragged her deeper into the foaming waters. Every wave seemed alive, surging higher, as if eager to claim her for the sins she carried in her heart. Her hands clawed at the surface, her eyes wide with terror, but the living fabric that had once glittered so beautifully now wound itself around her like a serpent, pulling her toward the abyss. The girl, the true owner of the magical garment, collapsed to her knees. Her palms pressed together, trembling as she whispered prayers into the wind. Her heart ached, not only for her own loss and humiliation, but for the fate of her sister, who had let envy lead her astray. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the sight of the raging ocean. Though the villagers muttered that this was justice, that the spirits had spoken, the girl could not harden her heart. Mercy, her mother had once told her, was the only force strong enough to soften the grip of cruelty. "Spirits of the deep," she cried, her voice breaking through the chaos. "She is guilty, yes, but she is still my sister. Let not her soul be lost forever. Show her a path to forgiveness, if only in death." Her words carried across the waves, and for a moment the sea stilled. The villagers gasped as the tide rolled back slightly, revealing the stepsister suspended in the water. Her body was bound tightly, but her face was clear in the moonlight, eyes pleading, lips trembling with a wordless apology. The ocean groaned like a living beast, ancient and powerful. From its depths rose a voice, neither male nor female, but vast and echoing with eternity. "Child of envy, you wore what was not yours. You sought beauty not by kindness but by theft. Your fate was sealed the moment your heart burned with greed. The dress does not serve envy. It serves love. And so love has called your punishment." The stepsister sobbed, twisting desperately against her bonds, but the voice thundered again. "Yet mercy has been spoken for you. Know this, spirit of envy, your body will sink beneath these waters, but your soul will be weighed by the tides. If it learns humility, perhaps it will rise again in another life. If not, you will drift forever, nameless among the lost." The villagers trembled at the judgment, clutching one another as lightning cracked across the dark sky. The stepsister gave one last scream, but it was quickly drowned as the waves surged forward, wrapping her in a whirlpool of foam and shadows. In an instant she was gone. Only the crashing of the sea remained, as though nothing had ever disturbed its depths. Then, as silence fell, the water began to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. Slowly, like a bird returning home, the magical dress rose from the waves. Its fabric, soaked yet radiant, floated through the air as though carried by invisible hands. It glided toward the girl, landing gently at her feet. Not a single thread was torn, not a single jewel was missing. It gleamed as it always had, untainted by envy or violence. The villagers bowed their heads in awe. Some whispered that the dress was sacred, others that it was cursed, but all knew that it belonged to the kind-hearted girl alone. She reached down with trembling fingers, touching the fabric with reverence. For a moment she feared it might reject her too. But as soon as her hands brushed the garment, it warmed against her skin, glowing softly like a fire rekindled. The spirits had chosen. The girl lifted the dress and held it close, her tears soaking into its folds. She whispered a quiet thank you to her mother, to the spirits, and even to the sea that had taken her sister. She did not rejoice in victory, nor did she smile. Instead she mourned, not only the stepsister who had been lost, but the bond that could have been, had envy not poisoned it. That night, the villagers escorted her back, treating her not just as a young woman, but as one touched by the spirits. They walked in silence, the sound of waves still echoing in their ears. Some feared her now, others revered her, but she felt none of their eyes upon her. Her thoughts remained with her sister, swallowed by the sea. In the seasons that followed, the story spread far beyond the village. Travelers carried tales of the girl with the living dress, of the sea that punished envy, and of the prayer that showed mercy even in betrayal. Children were taught never to covet what belonged to another, for the spirits watched closely. But they were also taught that compassion, even when undeserved, could soften the hardest judgments. And the girl? She kept the dress safe, locked away except for sacred days when she wore it to honor her late mother. Each time it graced her body, the fabric shimmered with gentle light, as if affirming its bond to her spirit. She wore it with humility, never boasting, never flaunting. In her heart, she carried both sorrow and strength, the memory of her sister's downfall, and the lesson of mercy that had been carved into her soul. Some say that on stormy nights, when the waves rage against the cliffs, a faint cry can be heard in the wind, the voice of the stepsister still wandering the tides. Others believe she was reborn, far away, into a life where she would learn kindness without envy. The girl herself never sought the answer. Instead, she prayed each night that her sister found peace, wherever her spirit drifted. And so, the tale ended not with triumph, but with balance. The dress, unchanged, returned to its rightful owner. The stepsister, swallowed by the sea, faced the weight of her choices. And the girl, gentle and merciful, became a living reminder that true beauty does not come from garments or power, it comes from the heart that wears them. The ocean had judged. The spirits had spoken. Yet mercy remained, eternal as the tide. The village had not seen such a night in living memory. The storm that had swallowed the stepsister still raged in the distance, though now it seemed to settle into a rhythm, as if the sea itself had spoken its last word. The villagers stood in stunned silence along the shoreline, their eyes fixed on the calm figure of the rightful sister, who held the shimmering dress that had just returned to her arms. The wind tugged gently at her hair, but unlike before, it no longer howled with malice. Instead, it seemed to bow to her presence. The elders stepped forward first. Their wrinkled faces carried the weight of years and the burden of wisdom. One of them, a woman whose voice had guided the people through famine and flood, spoke softly, yet every villager heard her as if the wind itself carried her words. Envy is a fire that burns the one who carries it. Tonight we have seen how envy takes and takes until nothing remains. The sea spirits have judged, but we too must remember. If we forget, the curse may rise again. The people nodded, murmuring their agreement, yet their hearts were not only heavy with fear. They also felt awe, for they had seen kindness triumph where vengeance might have prevailed. The rightful sister, who had every reason to hate, had prayed for her stepsister's soul, and though the sea had taken her, the spirits had surely witnessed the mercy. The children whispered among themselves, their eyes wide as they clutched their mother's skirts. They spoke of the dress that moved like a serpent, of the glowing fabric that shone like moonlight on water. Some were frightened, but others felt wonder stirring in their hearts. They had seen that power did not belong to those who snatched it in greed, but to those who held it with humility. In the days that followed, the story of what happened spread beyond the village. Travelers carried the tale to distant markets, and soon it became a warning told in every corner of the land. Beware the poison of envy, for even the sea will rise to swallow it. Yet those who retold it also spoke of the girl who chose compassion over spite, and how her heart brought her peace when the world offered her bitterness. The rightful sister, though still grieving the loss of family, even one who betrayed her, walked with quiet dignity. She wore the dress not as a jewel to flaunt, but as a reminder of the balance between kindness and destruction. At festivals, when she appeared in it, the fabric shimmered with a gentle light, not wild or menacing but warm like the glow of dawn. The villagers noticed that when she danced, the air seemed lighter, and when she prayed, the fields yielded more generously. They began to believe the dress was not only a gift of beauty but a blessing that answered to the purity of its wearer's heart. Parents began teaching their children a new kind of lesson. They told them, "It is not the dress that made her shine but her heart. A jealous spirit will always be bound no matter what it wears. But a loyal heart will always be free even in rags." The young ones listened carefully. They looked at one another differently after that, more mindful of their words, less eager to snatch what belonged to others. Slowly the village began to change. Where once there had been rivalry, there was now watchfulness against envy. Where once gossip had flourished, kindness began to take root. It was not a perfect place, no village ever is, but the memory of the sea dragging away the envious stepsister remained like a scar on the land, warning them not to let such bitterness grow again. The elders wove the story into songs. At moonlit gatherings they sang of two sisters, one who let envy consume her and one who chose mercy. The villagers clapped in rhythm, and as the younger generations heard the tale again and again, it carved itself into their hearts. Some would even say that when the waves crashed against the shore on stormy nights, you could still hear the faint cries of the stepsister, a reminder etched forever into the sea. And so, the lesson lived on. The people learned that beauty stolen is beauty cursed, but beauty cherished with humility becomes a blessing. They saw that loyalty is not weakness but strength, and that kindness, even toward those who wrong us, holds more power than vengeance ever could. The rightful sister herself became a figure of wisdom among them. She did not call herself queen, nor did she demand tribute. Yet when disputes arose, people often came to her. They trusted her judgment because they had seen her heart tested and found true. She taught them gently, reminding them that envy begins in the smallest of ways, one coveting another's joy, another's success, another's gift. Guard your heart, she would say. For envy is not only punished by the sea, it punishes you long before. Years later, when the sister was old and the dress had long since faded into threads of memory, the people still spoke of her. The fabric might have lost its shimmer, but the story did not. The village understood that the true dress had never been of silk or light. It had always been the garment of kindness, loyalty, and compassion, which no sea could drown and no envy could stain. The sea, meanwhile, remained restless as if always watching. On calm nights, its waves lapped gently, a reminder of the mercy that had been shown. On stormy nights, its roar echoed the judgment that had been carried out. Both were part of the same truth, that envy destroys but kindness endures. And so, the final lesson was not only for the village, but for all who would hear the tale. Envy consumes the soul, but compassion saves it. Power stolen will strangle its thief, but power earned through loyalty will bless generations. The sea remembers, and so must we. ****